Hi all you wonderful divers out there, I'm Mark, welcome to Scuba Diving Magazine, welcome to Ask Mark, where I answer all of your, or at least the ones that I can, some of your scuba diving questions. If you have any scuba diving questions about equipment or procedures, whatever it is, and you're unsure, you want me to discuss it in next week's show, pop it down in the comments below, use the hashtag AskMark, that way I can find it a little bit easier. If you do hear some like construction work, someone down the road's doing something, chopping things up, so I can only apologize for that. Hope the background music might cover it up. But yeah, anyway, this week we're talking about regulator bypass tubes. Drysuit components, my auto cue has stopped working. Oh, there it is. Inverted twin sets, inflator hose compatibility, shear water Perdix upgrades, as well as wave swell. Interesting questions today. Let's jump straight into the first question. The first question comes from Patrica11, and they say, I have a few questions. First, regulator, somehow I like Mares very much due to the quality of breathing. My question is about the side channel or metal pipe in the second stage. Does it prevent from free flow a little bit? I'm just to buy lots of goods for me and my wife and fighting between Mares Fusion or new Atlas or the Aqualung Legend MBS. So we're talking about second stages, and more specifically on the Mares second stages, they have what's called a bypass tube. I'll bring up a picture so you know what I'm talking about. Unlike most traditional second stages, this is a Apex XX50, pretty traditional. You have the hose that comes in traditionally from the right hand side, and with most standard second stages like this, the gas comes into a valve just around here, and then when you inhale, the valve opens, the gas comes into the main body of the second stage, it mills around, sometimes it's redirected, but sometimes it just mills around, and then it eventually goes into your mouth because you're inhaling and the pressure is pushing it that way. What Mares have on most of their second stages is what's called the bypass tube, and the bypass has a few benefits. The first one is that it bypasses the valve, so it's helping to prevent that valve from freezing, because when gases go from high pressure to low pressure, they get cold. It's like when you spray an aerosol can, the can itself starts to get cold. It's just thermodynamics or something. So by bypassing it, you're helping to keep that valve a little bit warmer, so less likely to freeze. It also, especially on the Atlas and the Fusion that you're talking about, they're a metal bypass tube. On the cheaper second stages, they're plastic, but the metal ones act as a better heat sink, so the gas is warming up a little bit as it comes through that bypass tube just by absorbing some heat from the surrounding water, and it redirects straight towards the mouthpiece. It joins just sort of in there in the second stage, and then there's usually a little vein, a little fin that points it straight towards your mouth. So this has a few benefits. You'll usually see something like VAD or vortex assisted design. The way that they've designed the bypass tube, it turns the airflow, so it creates a bit of a vortex, and that helps to reduce fluttering. If you know, on some second stages, when you inhale, you get that as you inhale. It helps to reduce that, so it's a smoother breathe. That bypass tube, it was on my very first regulator set, which was the Mares Abyss regulator a few generations ago, of course, but that was very similar to the modern day Fusion and Atlas. I think more towards the Fusion because it wasn't adjustable, but it was a metal body second stage, so very, very strong. It all acts as a good heat sink. Differences between the Atlas, or the Atlas ADJ I should say, and the Fusion. The first one is in that ADJ, in that the Atlas is adjustable, whereas the Fusion isn't. It's kind of on or off. I think it might have their VAD Plus, but I think they both have VAD Plus, where on the actual hose coming in, you have a little collar which you can twist, and it's like a turbo mode. If you feel that you need a lot of gas, you can rotate it and it almost increases airflow, so you get this like supercharging. You can get plenty of gas, but if you're just nice and chilled out, you can dial it down, and you still get plenty of gas, but you don't get quite as much gas. But that's the main difference between those two second stages. They both have their pivoting purge button. They're both metal body, or mostly metal bodies. But yeah, on the Atlas, you have that adjustable thing on the side. Whether you use it or not, it is just this sort of style thing. You can screw it in to make it a little bit harder to open up that valve, or unscrew it to make it a little bit lighter. If the second stage is coming out of your mouth and you're swapping second stages quite often, that's quite a nice feature. If it's just on your primary and that doesn't tend to leave your mouth, it's less of an important feature. The other main difference is in the first stage. Now, the Atlas comes with the 62X, which is a diddy, tiny, compact little first stage. I think it's still cold water rated, but for traveling divers, it's wonderful because it's very, very compact compared to the Fusion, which is on the 72X, I think. You can correct me down below if I'm wrong, but the 72X is a bit of a beast of a first stage from what I remember. I think it's quite big and heavy, so it's more designed for colder waters. In real cold waters, you do want a big chunk of a first stage because it all acts as a big heat sink. The 62X that comes with the Atlas is still cold water rated. It's environmentally sealed and everything, but it is nice and compact, so so for traveling it's much easier. Or the Aqualung Legend MBS. The Legend first stage again is a bit, it's bigger, it's more towards the 72X kind of size range, good for cold water. The second stage itself, the MBS, is a very different second stage. So on this XCX50, I have breathing adjustments and I have a Venturi switch. The Venturi helps to interrupt free flows, and the breathing adjustment just adjusts that cracking pressure, so how easy it is to inhale and open up that valve. The MBS only has one of these, but it does both of those features. So as you screw it in, it makes it harder for that valve to open, and it activates the Venturi system. It's a two-in-one combo, which is very clever. And as you unscrew it, it makes it easier to inhale, and it just improves airflow. So again, for a second stage that comes out of your mouth and you're switching between two second stages quite often, if you're diving side mount or something, or stage cylinders, it's quite a nice feature. But if it just stays in your mouth for recreational diving, then it's less of an important feature, but it is quite nice. Out of those three, for the traveling diver, I'd go for the Atlas. Because of that tiny compact little first stage. I was amazed at just how small it was when I first got it out of the box. Normally when you see pictures of first stages, you don't get a sort of a scale so you can see just how small it is, but as far as like weight, I think you're saving a good like 200 grams or something just in that first stage alone. The second stage is not a huge amount in it, but you get that adjustability. So between those three, personally, I'd probably go for the Atlas ADJ, and it's the newest. It's their flagship regulator as well, and Mares do make some really nice regulators. The Aqualung Legends are perfectly fine, perfectly great regulators in their own mind, but out of those three, personally, I'd probably go for the Atlas. Your second question: I would like to help my wife with underwater position and think about Aqualung Axiom or Swell BCD. What do you think about them? Thank you. So we're talking about the trim position in the water, and we're looking at the Axiom or the Swell BCD. The Swell pretty much is the women's version of the Axiom. It's just got a slightly shorter back plate. It still has their Rapture system, which is like the harness that helps to put the weight of the cylinder. It takes it off of your shoulders when you're walking around on the deck, and it puts it more on your hip, so it is a bit more comfortable to walk around. The BCD itself isn't going to make a huge amount of difference about your trim position. It's more about your weight distribution and where you're putting that lead weight. If you're going from rental BCDs to something like the Swell or the Axiom, then you're probably going to be putting it in your integrated weight systems. And the Axiom and the Swell I think do have trim weight pockets on the back, like between your shoulder blades, either side of your cylinder. That helps to take some lead off of your front and your waist and puts it up towards your shoulders to help put your shoulders downwards and get you a bit more horizontal in the water. But it's very much down to what position she's in, because a lot of female divers, they tend to have floaty ankles, so sometimes ankle weights can help to bring those down, or a heavier, less buoyant pair of fins. The BCD might help a little bit, but it's more about weight distribution and where that weight is placed on the diver to help them get that horizontal position. But between those two BCDs, they're both very nice. I love the Axiom, and the sole is pretty much the women's version as I understand it. So yeah, they're both top-notch BCDs. Stephen A says, I would like to ask Mark if he could explain the durability between standard and premium tri-laminate dry suits, specifically plastic zippers versus metal, sewn and taped versus sewn and glued seams, and more durable materials. Conventional wisdom is that metal, glued, and premium fabrics will last longer and be more durable, but no one seems to be able to quantify these extremely subjective terms, certainly not enough to justify what frequently is a 50% price increase. Thanks for your wealth of info and excited to see what you do with your new home. Thank you. Yeah, me as well. Yeah, so are the more expensive dry suits worth it? Sometimes, and it's, as you say, it's very like circumstantial. So okay, so if I do it per category, so the zippers you get two basic choices between zippers. As you say, you get the metal and the plastic zippers. A lot of the time they call them brass zippers and T-zip. T-zip is just one, it's like Hoover and vacuum cleaners. It's just one type of plastic zipper. YKK do a plastic zipper, T-zip do a zipper. There's quite a few different brands. The brass metal zippers we stole from like NASA or something. They are great. They do the job. The downside is that they're not very flexible. That's why you tend to see them more on back zip across the back of your shoulders. You don't tend to see too many front zips. You do see them, but they're not as frequent. Normally front zippers tend to be plastic zips nowadays. And the metal ones tend to be quite stiff unless you like lubricate them like really thoroughly and really look after them. Are they better? They're both, it is tough because they're both perfectly fine until you do something wrong. With a brass zipper, if you bend and fold it too much, it'll pop, so you can lose a tooth really easily. With plastic zippers, if you don't lubricate them or if you don't seat them quite properly, then they do tend to degrade. So as far as which is better, if it's on a back zip, I'd probably go with a brass zipper. If it's on a front zip, I go for a plastic T-zipper, just because they're a lot lighter, they're a lot easier to do all by yourself. But the general rule of thumb is if you look after it, it should last forever. But yeah, the metal ones are stronger, but less flexible, so do be careful, especially when you're like folding it up and packing it away. When it comes to the materials, yeah, it comes down to abrasion resistance, and you also get additional features as well. So my dry suit, for example, it's breathable. So on the surface, I'm not sweating away inside of my dry suit. I don't feel like I have to get out of it as soon as possible because I'm not in that 100% humid environment sealed inside of a plastic bag, because it's breathable. It does have Kevlar fiber, which helps to sort of reduce ripping and tearing and whatnot. But again, as long as you look after it and you're not bumping into things, it's not the end of the world. There are some additional benefits to slightly more flexible materials we get nowadays, and a lot of it comes down to the tailoring and the cut, because some dry suits are pretty basic. They're human shaped, but they're not always the most like flexible to move around in. But when it comes down to just pure abrasion resistance, yeah, if you take something like a waterproof dry suit, you can feel just how tough that material is and abrasion resistant it is compared to a more basic, cheaper suit. And we also get some that are designed for lightweight travel. The waterproof had the D9, I think it was, that was more lightweight, but of course then it's less abrasion resistant. So it's always that seesaw of, yeah, abrasion resistance versus weight. But if you're not bumping into things, you're not in like really harsh environments, no, I wouldn't worry too much about it. As far as seams, taped seams are really nice, and they're a bit easier to repair, because if you get a leak in a seam, you might be getting wet like here on your waist, but because it's next to a seam, the actual external leak could be coming in from here, but it travels throughout the seam and then it finds its way into the dry suit somewhere else. So if it's taped as well, then yeah, all you really need to do is either re-tape it or just sort of heat it up to help that glue like reseal. But it's normally like the crotch area you need to sort of keep a mind on. So yeah, it's very much up to what's important to you and your style of diving and where you're diving, whether you want a big heavyweight tough suit, something like the D1 or something that's got this really heavyweight material that can take a lot of abuse, or something that's more designed for lightweight travel, or something in the middle. Squiggly Carton 8 says, what are your thoughts on twin sets being mounted valves down? So inverted twin sets, they have their pros and their cons. Both of them have their pros and their cons. Personally, I have my valves upright, which is a more traditional like setup. You can still reach the valves, it's just not quite as easy, and you can't you can't ever really see what's going on, but that's a pretty traditional setup. By inverting it, you have the valves down in the small of your back, which is convenient for shutdown drills because it's much easier to reach the small of your back, and you can turn things off and you can like diagnose things a little bit easier. The downside comes in a lot of the extra infrastructure and the weight distribution. So if you have your valves inverted and downwards, the first thing that you need to do is ideally put a cage around it, so that when you sit down or when you like stand your tanks upright, your valves aren't just on the deck or on something, because you're going to damage your first stages, you're going to damage your valves. So you have to get a cage that then surrounds them. And with that, it means that your cylinders are probably about that much longer, or it's probably about 10 centimeters when you take it to the actual valve, but that shifts the overall weight and the center of buoyancy of those cylinders further upright, which could be quite nice for your trim to help get your shoulders down, but it means that the tops of those cylinders are going to be up around your head. So if you look up, you're going to clonk onto them. Giant stride entries, you're going to clonk them. So you often opt for like a 12-litre dumpy, so a shorter cylinder, which makes them a little bit bigger. They're the diameter of a 15-litre, but they're a little bit shorter, more that of a sort of a 10-litre. So there's pros and cons for that. The other one is hose routing. So now instead of a hose for my BCD inflator having to go over my shoulder and down to here, it now has to come up my back and then over my shoulder and then down to there. So that's extra hose. That's something else that can get like tangled up in things. For your dry suit, it's a little bit shorter because it comes just underneath your arm. Your second stages, yeah, it's just slightly different. It can be done, and some divers do it, and they do prefer it that way. It's just weighing up those pros and cons, but the main ones is that extra infrastructure, the cage, the shift in the center of buoyancy, and the hose distribution, really. Otherwise, yeah, it's just like carrying them around because there's no easy to grab like handle unless you add an extra something. Those are the main downsides for me, so I just like to do a traditional upright. Joseph Gurnek says, hello Mark, can you explain why I found that inflator hose connection is different on some BCDs and some are not interchangeable? Thanks, Joe. A good question. So yeah, the first thing is that we have, what about 4 or 5 different quick disconnect styles of hose. So the first one is gonna be something like this. These are the same. These are so these are all what we call international DIN, the same DIN as in your first stage. These are what's on like 99% of your like BCDs and Drysuits. We also have C-Gen. So that is C-Gen, which is slightly different, but in some circumstances they can be interchangeable, but rare circumstances. We also have another one that I probably don't have, which is brand specific. So Buddy have one. It's for like auto air. You know those inflators for BCDs that have like a built-in second stage? They, because you can breathe from them, they require a higher amount of airflow, so they need a different fitting. But the Scuba Pro will have a Scuba Pro fitting. Buddy have one. I imagine the Atomic Aquatics one, the SS1, has a different fitting as well. So these immediately aren't always interchangeable. So there's your first one. The second one comes down to, on the inside of here, you will have what's called a Schrader valve, similar to what's on your car tire. And these are not universal. So hopefully these two are going to be different, just so that you can see the differences. Yeah. Right. So these two little Schrader valves, if you can see that on the close-up camera, they work by the little pin right at the top. If I line them up so you can see that they're ever so slightly different, the little pin on the top is pushed in when you've connected the hose, and when you push that pin in, the bottom gets pushed out. That's what opens up the valve. So when you disconnect your quick disconnect hose underwater, it closes the valve and it doesn't leak any air. But when you do connect it onto something, it allows airflow. Now, those two pins are ever so slightly different lengths. The one on the blue looks to be probably about 1 mil longer. So that in itself isn't the only issue. If we have different inflators, so those two are pretty similar, those two. Right, so this is the other end of the connector, and on this section, you see we've got a little raised bit. I call this a knife. I don't know why, that's just something that my mind, it's probably got an official name. But that little bit there is just a little bit longer on this inflator hose compared to that one. On other inflators, you don't get that knife at all. It's completely flat. So if you get the shorter Schrader valve and the shorter knife and they connect, chances are it doesn't open up that Schrader valve. So there are some circumstances, it's like genetics, and you get dominant and recessive. If you get two dominants, so a long Schrader valve and a long knife, they're going to connect. But if you get two recessive, a shorter Schrader valve and a shorter knife on the inflator, then they're not going to connect and it's not going to open up that valve. So it's fairly rare, but it does happen. You do get some combinations of inflator and inflator hose, and it's really down to the Schrader valves and the actual connection fitting on that inflator. That's the main downside. It does happen. It's a great question, and it's a real pain when you come to sort of replace some hoses. It's quite rare that you can get replacements of these. They do exist, but again, the thread on the inside is slightly different when you go to different inflators. So yeah, it's best to kind of stick with what you have. You do get some fairly universal ones. Meflex hoses tend to fit most, but it's in no way universal, unfortunately, and that's mainly why it's down to that small little pin on the Schrader valve and the little knife on the end of that valve fitting. The next question comes from Alan Heinrich, and they say, Mark, would you buy a Perdix AI or the new Perdix 2? I know with the software upgrade you get, you can add more transmitters to the Perdix AI. Thoughts? Yes, so a few weeks ago now, Shearwater announced the Perdix 2 and the Petrol 3 upgrades. So would you wait for the new Perdix 2, which is available? I have seen it on some stores. I'll pop a link down in the description or up here in the comments, so you can check it out. Right, so the upgrades on the Perdix to the Perdix 2, you get the titanium bezel. Do I have any Perdix? So the titanium bezel, which is a bit tougher. So there's my Perdix, or Perdix 1 now, I suppose you'd call it. So this has a plastic bezel, which as long as you don't bump and scratch is perfectly fine. But now you get the choice of a titanium bezel, which is either matte black, which you pay a little bit more for, or like natural titanium color, which I kind of prefer, but that's up to you. It's mainly down to strength and protection if you're bumping it around, but I tend to look after my computer so it doesn't tend to get bumped around. You get titanium buttons instead of the standard plastic piezoelectric buttons on there. Again, it's just tougher, touch wood. I've never had a problem with the plastic version. You get a tougher screen. It's aluminosilicate glass or something. It's what they use on mobile phones, so it's a bit more scratch resistant, but I just use a scratch protector to help it. You can connect it to 4 transmitters, I think, which is more than I ever really use anyway. Everything else is the same. It's still AA. The Perdix 1 had a dual O-ring. That's the main upgrade on the Petrol, is that it has 2 O-rings on that seal now. The Perdix and the Perdix 2 also have 2, but otherwise the main upgrade for me is in that vibration alert feature. It has a they call it a strong vibration on the Petrol because it's got a little bit bigger body. I imagine it's got a bigger weight to shake around, whereas in the smaller body of the Perdix it's a little bit lighter, but still it's probably similar to what you have in the Peregrine. Just a vibration alert, which I do quite like. It's quite nice to yeah, that's me, without, I mean the Perdix doesn't beep or anything and alert the entire dive site, but yeah, it is quite nice not to have that incessant beeping. It just vibrates on your wrist to really get your attention. Is it worth the upgrade? If you have a Perdix AI, I probably wouldn't bother investing in a replacement for it unless it's broken for whatever reason. But if you're at that wonderful stage where you have to choose between the Perdix AI and the Perdix 2, then it just comes down to cost, really, because you might hopefully be able to find somewhere that's selling an older, I say an older, a previous generation Perdix new for a lower cost compared to the standard base rate. So maybe, but you've got the main one is in that vibration alert. I do quite like that feature. I would like that in my Perdix 1. The titanium and whatnot, it's cool, but as long as you're not bumping into stuff, you're not damaging your dive computer, then it is not an essential feature. But the vibration is quite nice. But you're going to start to see fewer and fewer of these on the shelves because they did have was it the Perdix they had production issues with? They couldn't make a certain or get hold of enough chips, thanks to 2019 and everything that happened after that. They couldn't get hold of a certain chip that went, maybe it was the Peregrine, I forget which, but they were quite scarce. I was trying to combine sparse and scarce into one unique word. So yeah, you might struggle to find a Perdix AI available online or in your dive shop. If you do, there's nothing wrong with it. They're wonderful dive computers, but yeah, just weigh up the cost, but it's mainly down to that like vibration feature for me. J.R. Gilkinson, can you please explain wave swell period as it relates to shore diving? I dive a lot in Laguna Beach in California. So wave swell. Okay, so when you have waves, you have the, trying to remember all the correct terminology. You have the trough and the peak. So a traditional wave diagram. The swell height is the height from the bottom of the trough to the top of the peak. So that's how high the waves actually are. The swell period is the time period between two peaks. So if it's like 2 seconds, you're going to get hit by a fresh wave every 2 seconds. If it's 2 minutes, you're going to get hit by a wave every 2 minutes. That's kind of it. And the longer the swell period, the bit more easier it is for you to get out of the water, because if you're shore diving and you're being hit by consistent waves, that's going to be a bit of a pain. It can stir up the water, but it's more down to the swell height. It's really one of those sort of things that you just have to kind of pick up and learn over time. There are they're normally for surfers, to predict when's the best like surf periods, but yeah, it's mainly just the frequency of the waves is your swell period, and the swell height is just the height of the waves. You want that as low as possible, so when you're on the surface, nothing's really going on. Once you reach like 5 meters under the water, a good few feet underwater, you don't really notice it. It's really only the first few meters underwater, the first like 10 feet or something, where you can still feel it. Once you get below that, you really don't feel it, unless it is like really serious sort of swell, big waves that are really sucking and moving the water up. So yeah, you want those numbers typically as kind of small as possible, so small waves, so you're not getting thrown around too much. And the swell period, yeah, it's more the swell height that you need to pay attention to. If it's a short period, it's just consistent, which is kind of annoying. But if it's longer, then you get a bit more on that kind of slack time to be able to get stuff done without just being beaten up. And that's it for another week. Some very interesting questions again. Yeah, Schrader valves, something that new divers, you suddenly learn about. You haven't even gotten to swivel pins yet, because swivel pins aren't universal. Some of them can be fairly universal and you can use, but others just aren't. Whether they have a flange or not, swivel pins. But yeah, Schrader valves, fitting them to quick disconnect hoses, a lot of the time you're okay, but there are some connectors that just don't meet up, and yeah, you won't be able to use it. But if you've got any interesting questions, by all means let me know down in the comments below, and if you use the hashtag AskMark, makes it a lot easier for me to find it. Just add it at the beginning or the end, it doesn't really matter, as long as it's in your comments. YouTube filters it because it thinks it's a link, so it just hides it, puts it on a special list for me, and I just authorize them once a day just to sort of get them on the website, but then I'll answer them in next Sunday's show. Remember to head over to scubadivermagazine.com. Lots of interesting things. We're not just a magazine, but we do have all of the latest news, gear reviews, all that good stuff. So head over to the website, take a look around and check out the magazine. As always, thank you for watching everybody, and of course, safe diving.